Well, g'day and welcome to this special Reality Check news update. There's so much happening in UAPology at the moment, and frankly, we were thinking that it's important to get these two major news stories up on the agenda as quickly as possible. First off, Dr. Beatriz Villarroel. You may recall a few weeks back, Beatriz came on Reality Check and told us about the work that she's been doing on these so-called transient objects in geostationary Earth orbit, which she, in a couple of new papers, suggested were in fact artificial, reflective, constructed objects. It was and remains a momentous paper. And the reason we're bringing Beatrice back today is because there's been a new development. Beatrice, welcome to Reality
Hello.
Check. What's happening? What's the news?
Well, there are actually some good news. So we had two papers that were exciting. One about the transient UFO and new connection by Stephen Brewell and myself. And the second paper where we are searching for NHI artifacts by looking for things that look like solar reflections and and satellites in pre-Sputnik images. And both these two papers have now passed peer review, and they are accepted for publication. In fact, they are published. So they got published on Monday now,
Wow,
on
so
the
you have
20th.
now two papers on UAPs published as peer-reviewed papers. In which journals?
So one is a scientific report, and that belongs to the Nature journals. And the second is publications of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, PASP, and it's a good astronomy journal.
This is momentous, Beatrice. I know how hard it is to get anything on UAPs past peer review. You've basically got an article which has survived the scrutiny of all of the peer review experts, essentially an article suggesting that there are artificial constructed objects that were reflective, specular, in Earth orbit before humans sent up objects into space.
Exactly. So it's fun. It's very exciting to have these
Now,
two
you were
papers
expecting to get shot
published.
down, weren't you? You were expecting quite an aggressive response from debunkers and peer reviewers. Was it a tough go to get through the peer review?
It was really tough for this paper with NHI artifacts, but the referee was constructive and curious. And I think that's the golden thing when you are talking to a curious person. They do propose good tests, and you can try and you can check. So it was difficult, challenging, but great. I
Well,
enjoyed the process.
congratulations. It's very
Yeah.
rare to get anything relating to UFOs, UAPs, unidentified objects into a peer-reviewed journal, especially journals as prestigious as the ones you're talking about. Let me do a
Oh,
quick summary. So, the study that you did, you were looking at pre-satellite transient sky events. And you basically analysed nearly 300,000 short lived transient events that were captured on red sensitive photographic plates from the first Palomar sky survey. And these exposures were all taken between 1948 and before humans put satellites up in the late 1950s. And each of these exposures lasted about 45, 50 minutes. And you focused on identifying cases where three or more transient points appeared along a straight line during the same exposure. And the reason why those lines matter is if a single flash appears on a sky plate, it could be a glitch, but multiple point-like lights perfectly aligned and visible in one long exposure photo, that hints at something coordinated, possibly spinning or reflective objects. And you can rule out natural sources like meteors, stars, and asteroids. They don't line up and appear simultaneously. You can rule out now plate defects because you were able to show, weren't you, as you told us previously, that when you go into the shadow of the sun, Obviously, it removes the reflectiveness, so clearly it's not a plate defect. And you basically what the only plausible explanation is artificial reflections from flat, highly reflective surfaces in geosynchronous orbit. That's exactly what explains you're talking about. How many of these objects are we talking about, Beatrice?
So we had two candidates that are highly interesting that the paper resulted in. And there's still one little caveat. For these two candidates, there's a minuscule chance that it might be something called optical ghosting on in the instruments. What speaks against it is because we looked at the blue sensitive images and you don't see anything there. If it would be optical ghosting, you would also see with the same setup of the instruments, you would see something there, but we don't. However, we always leave that little caveat. But what even more talks about that these things are real is because when we look at all the transients, not only at the aligned ones, but all the transients in the Earth shadow, we do see this huge deficit of transients. And that really speaks for that what we are dealing with are solar reflections from very flat, very reflective objects in
So,
geosynchronous orbit.
Doctor, tell me, what could this be? What are these objects?
Well, these are objects before Sputnik 1 when humans had nothing up there. And these things, no matter what they are, they need to be really flat, reflective like a mirror. And I personally don't know anything natural that produces and that looks like that fulfills these requirements.
And am I
So
am I correct in saying there are literally tens of thousands of these objects that you've detected?
we see that roughly 35,000 transients are belonging to this kind of category, but that is just for the northern hemisphere, which means that we would need to have around 70,000 of transients around, I mean, for the whole Earth. And from that, we can estimate that maybe tens of thousands to hundred thousands of objects around the Earth must have been there.
Now, we know that they were there
Mm.
in pre-Sputnik 1950s. What do
Yes,
we know about whether they're still there? Can we rule out the possibility or the probability that they're still there in geosynchronous orbit?
I have no idea because if these are what I think they are, I mean, if these are artificial objects which the signatures are pointing towards, I have no idea what they could have done or if they are there still. I would assume they're there still.
But it's a reasonable conclusion, isn't it, Doctor,
Yeah.
that if these are artificial objects,
Yes.
some civilization has constructed them.
Yes, I would say so. I mean, it's not ours.
And when your peer review colleagues asked you questions, were they aware of the significance of what these papers are pointing to?
I don't know. We were talking about the technicalities, not about the implications.
It's interesting because scientists get bogged down, and obviously for good reason, in exploring alternative prosaic explanations. But when you
Mm.
think about it and step back from the implications of what you're saying, this is massive. You are the author or the lead author of two papers which essentially suggest that there are artificial constructed objects in geosynchronous Earth orbit in the 1950s before humans sent up satellites. And to this day, we don't know if those objects are still there, but they are indicative of something constructed.
Isn't that exciting?
Good for you. I mean, the implications are this might be the first scientific evidence of a non human intelligence.
And it certainly is going to be, what I like about this is that we are giving exact methods and strategies for people to explore the UFO question and the question if they are here through just easily available methods that many astronomers over the whole world can work with. Because these plate archives exist in so many countries. And you don't need to be part of some very expensive, big collaboration because if you have access to this open data, anyone can go in, they can analyze these data sets, they can download them, and they can check if there's a deficit in the Earth shadow or if they see alignments. It's a very open source way of working. So I think, yes, we are going to be able to really pin down a very secure answer very soon if more people try to replicate this and work with the same questions and methods. So
What's
I'm
the
excited.
reaction from your astronomer colleagues? Are people aware yet that these papers are accepted for peer-reviewed publication?
I guess they are finding out these days. It will be exciting to follow.
But I mean, this is momentous, isn't it? I mean, explain to our audience, please, what is the significance of getting peer-reviewed on a paper like this?
Well, so the peer review process exists to remove like errors that someone can notice, like errors, and but also like logical flaws, and to have a discussion like different perspectives. Could it be this? Could it be that? And so the peer review process is very important from that perspective. Traditionally, it has also been it has been a way of also stopping unorthodox ideas, unfortunately. So the peer review has not only good things, it also has bad things, because if you have something that is very new and unique, then you have you're going to hit into a wall. And now there's a big stigma around the UAP topic, which has made that most papers don't even go into peer review. They get rejected at the editor's desk. So now we have these two new papers, and they have done passed the peer review, they have been published now, and that means that they passed the quality checks, of course. And now, and it's different journals. And actually, there's also a third paper that was published now in the beginning of August. So we have 3 papers on this topic with the ET probes and UAPs around the Earth, and that are all published in different journals and with different processes. And I think it's very good. It's a very good big step.
Now, Beatrice, I'm going to invite you to do something that scientists don't normally do. I want you to speculate.
Okay.
There's obviously something that you've captured that was there in the 1950s. What do you think it might be? What's in your mind, a plausible explanation for what those objects might be?
So there are different plausible explanations. One is maybe that there is something we don't know about the human civilization, and maybe we had a few rounds already, and
So
it's
maybe
one
there's a prior
possibility.
human civilization that was wiped out, as people like Graham Hancock talk about, the younger
That's one
Dryas 12 and a
possibility.
half thousand years ago. Maybe there was a prior human civilization, and a lot of these megalithic monuments we see on the planet are in fact remnants of a previous, possibly human civilization. That's a good one. And an
Or
alternative explanation?
maybe it's non-human probes that are that were sent here, like Patrick Jackson. He has this beautiful suggestion of a surveillance network, and I think that kind of it looks very logical. If you have another civilization that is capable of constructing these probes, why wouldn't they send here lots of them?
So
So that's a possibility.
we're actually, just so our audience know, we're going to be bringing Patrick on the show very soon. I've been talking to Patrick for quite some time, and we're going to be doing an interview with him talking about his theory, his hypothesis that essentially these metallic spheres that are being seen all over the planet are some kind of Earth monitoring or defense system by a possible non-human intelligence civilization that's keeping an eye on the planet. You probably are a very big science fiction buff, aren't you, Beatrice? I mean,
I
there's the
used to be, but not so much anymore. And I must admit, in the past, I loved to watch Doctor Who, but the latest seasons didn't work for me.
No, me neither. Me neither. But what I do like from Arthur C. Clarke is the
Mm.
notion of the Sentinel, and obviously that was the inspiration for the movie Space Odyssey 2001. The idea that when humans discovered a Sentinel constructed by a non-human civilization on the moon, it activated the beginning of an opening of awareness of human consciousness. I mean, wow! Wouldn't it be incredible if the discovery of this possibly constructed artificial objects in geostationary Earth orbit was the trigger for something amazing in humanity?
It would be amazing, and I hope it brings humanity closer to each other because I mean, we are living in times when there's so much of geopolitical instability, but we need to stop fighting in between each other and start embracing humanity and protecting humans because we are not alone here, probably. As far as I see it, I think we would never were alone, and then we need to just collaborate, try to find peace in the best possible way.
So, Beatrice, the implications of this have not really, to date, in your previously published papers, they haven't been picked up by mainstream media. Does the fact that you now have peer review, that your peers have assessed your papers as legitimate for publication in a prestigious scientific journal, does that have an impact, do you think, on the likelihood that the rest of the mainstream media will pick it up and run with it?
I think it's bigger probability, but maybe mainstream media, when they see the news, they're still going to be a little bit scared because I think the stigma exists everywhere. It's not only in the scientific journals, it also exists in I mean, in various news outlets. People look at it and say, oh, can it really be? This looks a little crazy. So I think you're going to find the stigma everywhere, but maybe there's a bigger probability that some mainstream media will look at it now.
So, how categorical are you in your mind that these objects, these tens of thousands of objects in geostationary Earth orbit, are constructed objects, artificial objects?
I mean, nature can always surprise us with something we could never have imagined. So I cannot exclude that there might be some other explanation that is just outside my imagination. But from what I see, I can't find any other consistent explanation than that we are looking at something artificial before Sputnik 1.
There's absolutely no doubt that the National Security Agency of the United States, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, they have satellites in Earth orbit which could be used to look at objects in geostationary orbit. The heat should be put on NASA and the various US government intelligence and defense agencies that have the capacity to investigate this area of space. They have cameras that could quite easily look at geostationary Earth orbit and resolve this mystery for us very quickly, couldn't they?
I think it would be amazing if they could help us with this. Another thing, imagine if you could go there with a big net and just pick up all the objects you can find from the geosynchronous and you take it down here.
So, how far
Well,
out is geosynchronous orbit? It's several hundred miles, isn't it?
well, we are looking here at 42,000 kilometers.
Oh, wow. Gosh, 42,000 kilometers from the Earth. That shows my level of understanding. So, it's quite a way away from the Earth, but still visible with some of the orbital telescopes that we have.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Beatriz Villarroel, thank you so much for joining us here on Reality Check, and congratulations on achieving peer review on such a stigmatized and often ridiculed subject. I actually think this is quite an historic moment to see somebody of your reputation as an astronomer being able to get papers accepted for peer review in prestigious scientific journals. Many congratulations. Well done.
Thanks a
Where do
lot.
you go to next? What's the next inquiry you'd like to do?
So we're still working with, for example, the ExoPro project, and like we want to expand on that, like adding a telescope and try to construct our own lists of mystery transients that might exist today and see how, like, the difference in number from how many we can see in the photographic plates versus how many we can see today, because that can help us to understand the contribution of humans to this total number.
Well, either way, what you've achieved to date is momentous. I think it's quite
Thanks.
historic. And thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
bringing it to us on Reality Check. Thank you so much,
Thanks a lot.
Beatrice Villarroel.
Thanks.
Okay, so a few weeks back, you may recall we interviewed Canadian journalist Daniel Otis about what's been going on in Canada. One of the big issues that I'm fascinated with is whether Canadian scientists have collaborated with any American scientists on the legacy UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program. And the history of this query comes from a letter that a Canadian MP, Member of Parliament, Larry Maguire, wrote to the Canadian Defence Minister about 2 or 3 years ago, because he had a tip that there were indeed collaborations between Canadian scientists and American scientists on retrieved material. On the 22nd of March 2023, he wrote to the Canadian Defence Minister Anand, stating that Canada's Defence Research and Development Canada organisation, the DRDC, has participated in efforts to analyse UAP, which is publicly traceable to circa 1950. This recovered material, he said, is studied through the Five Eyes Foreign Material Program, the FMP, which in Canada is sponsored by the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command, aligned with several intelligence sharing arrangements and treaties. Now, that was quite an important allegation by Mr. Maguire, who's since left Parliament. And we did put questions at the time of the Daniel Otis interview to Larry Maguire so that we could include them in that interview. Unfortunately, he didn't get back to us in time, but he's now responded. And I think it's important to put his answers on the public record. So he has conceded in his answer to me that it is possible there are other arrangements and collaborations beyond the Five Eyes Foreign Materiel Program. The minister came back, of course, and categorically denied that it was part of the DRDC, the Defence Research and Development Canada organisation. And so the big question that's not resolved in her answer is whether what Canada's been doing is being done through the auspices of some other government agency. And so Larry Maguire said, even though I'm no longer an MP, if I could get my sources who are willing to meet, would be willing to meet with current members of Parliament and staff, it could help consolidate information and do an exchange of notes. And I will ask my sources. I've got people who've told me that Canada is collaborating with US scientists, and a lot of them, frankly, are just terrified. What Larry says is what's needed is more collaboration across countries and legislative bodies, which I warmly acknowledge. One of the other things that I asked him was, do you accept the categorical response from the minister that the Canadian Armed Forces have never had any possession of UAP materials? And he says, I just don't think the minister or defence officials took my letter seriously, nor investigated its contents. If they were serious, you'd think the minister or someone from her office would have reached out to try and start a conversation. Make no mistake, he says, the stigma and taboo of this topic still exist, which is part of the reason why so few people want to engage. Another intriguing answer he gave me, I asked him, how sure are you of the American sources that told you of this collaboration between Canadian scientists and American scientists? And he said, they weren't American. He noted that the minister didn't even acknowledge that Canada is part of the Foreign Material Program, which to the best of my knowledge has never been publicly acknowledged by anyone in Canada. For some reason, the simple fact that Canada participates for legitimate reasons that go beyond this issue is not openly acknowledged. I'm not aware of the rationale behind it. I also asked him if it's possible that Canadian scientists were seconded from their roles in defence or intelligence to a private US aerospace corporation with offices in Canada. And the reason I asked that question is because that's what I've been told. And he said, that's certainly a possibility. I've never encountered this specific claim and no one's presented that information to me before. I asked him, do you believe the minister's statement that neither the Defence Department nor the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command are or were involved in any type of formal analysis of UAP, and that all formal efforts to study UAP ceased in Canada in the 1960s? And he said to me, "This is where government departments often play fast and loose with definitions. It's hard to believe that no analysis has been done since then. The real question is what's been happening over all these decades and why no one has spoken publicly about it. That was one of the reasons why I pushed the Chief Science Advisor to produce the Sky Canada project. It's also worth noting that the Department of National Defence was far from helpful in cooperating with the Sky Canada team." I just want to get a lot of what Larry said on the record, so forgive me for being a bit of a pedant to make sure I get all his answers. "What is your personal view," I asked him, "on the broad question of whether there's been a historical cover-up of what governments know about UAPs, especially some of the Five Eyes nations like Canada, the US and UK?" He said, quote, "There've been far too many people, many with impeccable credentials, who've spoken either publicly or privately about the existence of highly sensitive information. Either every single one of them is lying or there is something happening that deserves attention. It's easy to dismiss one or two individuals, but when multiple credible voices raise the same concerns, even within the limits of non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements, the responsibility shifts to policymakers and the press to pursue the truth. Each year, more people seem to take an interest in the subject, quietly following along and weighing what they hear. I see this topic," he says, "like any other issue that demands public policy change. Building a case takes time. There are stakeholders, including a growing number of organisations and loosely connected groups. There are activists who use social media and podcasts to raise awareness and push the conversations forward. And there is the media, which is trying to sort fact from speculation while competing for public attention. Naturally, this creates tension and debate as some participants are deeply passionate and convinced they know the answer, while others are cautious. These discussions can be messy and patience is required. What matters most," he says, "is that people stay engaged and open to where the evidence leads. Keep asking questions and don't be afraid to pop your head up." And I guess the most interesting question I asked him was, with the benefit of hindsight, do you believe now that the US and possibly other countries have been involved in the recovery of exotic, potentially non-human technology and are secretly involved in reverse engineering efforts? And he said, "That's the million-dollar question. I honestly don't know what we're dealing with. There are so many theories and possibilities. My instinct is that the truth, whatever it may be, will not be as clear-cut as everyone hopes. On the balance of probabilities, there is clearly something there that companies and individuals within governments want to keep secret. The reasons for the secrecy are harder to pin down. Perhaps they've lied for so long they can't untangle the situation without damaging their credibility. Perhaps public funds were misused. Perhaps the information is so disruptive that it would overturn political agendas or unsettle global markets. Or it may be that they fear revealing it could give foreign adversaries an advantage. Hal Puthoff once spoke about being part of a study team that looked at the potential consequences of disclosure. The group concluded that it was better to keep the information secret. One detail, Larry Maguire tells me, that has gone largely unnoticed in mainstream news is that the UAP Disclosure Act defined non-human intelligence. The fact that Senator Chuck Schumer sponsored legislation that did so is remarkable in itself. Even more interesting is that the Act called for a review board that would include a sociologist and an economist among its 9 members. That raises the question of why these particular fields were considered necessary, and unless the social and economic consequences of disclosure were expected to be significant. So those are the comments from Larry Maguire, a former Canadian MP who was very integral in getting the Sky Canada project up and running. I think it's really important to get his comments on the public record. And thank you, Larry, for giving us those comments. I hope you find that interesting. And thank you once again for joining this news update for Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart. If you've got any questions for me, you can send me questions to realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. And please don't forget, you can listen to us on all the available podcasts, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.